So, we are once again looking at another Japanese exclusive video game. Is it really that hard to pay someone to rewrite some text in a game? Well, anyway, it's time we look back on Monolith Soft's second Super Robot Tyson game, only 8 months after I looked over the first. Yeah, sorry this took so long. But here I am now, so let's dive into Super Robot Tyson OG Saga Endless Frontier Exeed. Who names these games? Now before we begin, a quick reminder that videos like these are brought to you by my lovely patrons like Cameron Strauss. For as little as $3 Australian a month, you can get your name shouted out at the start of every Xenosegment video, as well as access to bonus behind the scenes content, link in the description below. Following some relatively strong sales and fan response to their first Super Robot Tyson game, the team at Monolith Soft and band Presto would decide to push for another game to follow up this DS collaboration. For this new game, the team decided to keep the formula established in the first game by making this new game a direct sequel carrying on the plot after the climax of the first game. Developing this game would be pretty much the same team as last time, with Soichiro Morizumi directing, while Koji Ishitani would be producer. Brand Presto's Kensuke Tsukunaka and Takanobu Tarada would also return to supervise the project. With the same team working on the game, progress would be swift, with development taking less than 2 years to bring the game to fruition. With the game being a direct sequel, the team sought to find ways to outdo their previous Super Robot Tyson game. This would include the introduction of multiple new characters to fight alongside the already sizable returning cast. Unlike the previous game, an anime intro would be added in a similar manner to Namco Cross Capcom. The story too would try to up the stakes from the first game. These decisions would end up leading to the game's subtitle of Exeed, which was chosen by the team to boldly state that this game was going above and beyond the heights of the first game. With the game boldly stating its status to the world, it would end up releasing in Japan on the 25th of February 2010. Unfortunately, this would be the game's only release. Likely due to the poor sales of the first game in North America, which as a reminder was more due to its premium format, the game's publisher Bandai Namco would not authorise a localization. With no publisher to translate the game, it would once again fall to fans to get this game into English. In October 2019, the team of Ultima Translations would release a full translation patch of the game, which is what I'll be playing today, so a big thanks has to go out to the hard work that they did to get this game playable in English. And so, without further ado, let's get into the story. The story begins by rehashing the introduction to the Endless Frontier from the first game. This scene then goes on to describe the events of the first game, in which Haken and his companions defeat the Ennist, who created the Endless Frontier and then threatened the people in it. With the Ennist defeated, the worlds of the Endless Frontier would fuse together to form a brand new single world, no longer connected via dimensional gates. This fusing of worlds had not only brought the worlds of the Endless Frontier together, but also added additional lands previously not known to people. One such of these worlds was the Wave Kingdom, which had also brought with it the return of the Elves, a race previously thought lost to the Endless Frontier. The story then jumps to the Wave Kingdom, where we meet our protagonist, 17-year-old Aladdin Nash, as he's given orders by his master Cindy Bard to pursue the fighting robot machine Archeon, which had disappeared. Joining Aladdin is Princess Niji Hausen of the Elves, who offers to help Aladdin in return for him helping her get back to her old castle in Elftale. While the duo head off to find Archeon, we then jump to the land of Formidheim, working Ezel Granada tasks Ascian, who is on loan from Haken, and Hen Valkyria to investigate the appearance of new crossgates in the Endless Frontier. Ezel suspects that the Ennist have returned, as, since the worlds have fused, crossgates should no longer exist. The appearance of new crossgates also interests Ascian, who is on the lookout for Reggie, Zymu and Cosmos, who have all disappeared following the fusing of the worlds. If two stories wasn't confusing enough, we then jump to the Schleifen Celeste, where we meet the duo of Axel Alma and Alfimi, who get teleported from an unknown location into the giant crashed spaceship. The two quickly realise they've lost all memory, with the exception of their names. Attempting to escape the ship, the duo run into Haken, who after a little brawl decides how to duo out and regaining their memories, as well as find out where they came from. And once again, I'm going to wrap the story up there, as the plot once again gets very confusing very quickly as more plots unfold. For those interested, you can find all the cutscenes compiled here, or you can just play the game for yourself, following the guides of Ultima Translations to patch the Japanese game. Presentation wise, not much has changed in the game. Visually, the game has gone from looking like an early Super Nintendo JRPG to a more later Super Nintendo JRPG. This subtle improvement is most notable in the overworld, where we now have a much more detailed map instead of the Minecrafty looking map of the first game. Meanwhile, in dungeons, the improving visuals are much less notable, with the game still delivering an overall pretty brand look in comparison to other DSRPGs I have played like Tales of Hearts and Pokemon Black and White. Navigation is much the same as the previous game, with you being able to climb up walls and blow up objects to navigate around different lands and dungeons of the Endless Frontier. These locales include both previous places from the first game as well as a bunch of new places. With a much larger map, the party can now quickly travel around the lands of the Endless Frontier using the submarine Silent Vox, which had previously only had limited uses in the last game. As to something completely new to this game, we now have wanted posters. These can be found in dungeons and give details on optional bosses the party can take on for additional money, experience and items. Dialogue exchanges continue to use the full-size 2D character models, and much like the last game, we have a cast which is predominantly made up of attractive women, who once again flaunt their assets in a myriad of fan-servicey moments. I will admit, the crassier parts of the game do put me off at making these retrospectives. Let's just say if this game wasn't part of the Monolith crossover verse, I doubt I would be covering here on this channel. Looking past this game's more questionable parts, we see the return of the original characters from the first game, including Haken, Ashen, Kaguya, Suzuka, Reggie, Zymo and Cosmos, alongside the three mechs of Phantom, Natch and Abend. Alongside the returning cast, we now have the new playable characters of Aladi, Neige, and the duo fighters of Axel and Alfimi. Not only do we have new playable characters, several side characters from the previous game now join your party as assist fighters, who can be called in mid-battle to help extend combos. This includes the addition of Momo, who returns to this crossover series after her initial appearance in Namco Cross Capcom, as well as Saga and Telos, who switch over from being antagonists to assist fighters. The inclusion of these side characters into the final cast ends up making the party very huge, as well as making battles much more chaotic. Much like with the presentation, the gameplay is not massively different from the first game. Battles once again occur randomly as you navigate the overworld and dungeons, and combat is again turn-based, in which each round a turn order is established with speedier characters often getting placed higher on the list. As per usual in the series by this point, characters attack using a series of pre-made combos that can be assigned before combat, then executing them by pressing the A button. By timing attacks and keeping the enemy in the air, you build up a combo meter, which in turn increases the chance of attacks doing critical damage. So rather than just repeating myself, let's talk about what has changed since the last game. Well, for a start, the characters now have new moves, meaning that you'll need to readjust your timing to optimally combo with the returning characters. The new moves also extend into the overdrive attacks, which include more anime cut-ins, making the battles even more of a visual showcase. Outside of the simple cosmetic changes, assists have been changed drastically since the first game. Characters can now call in two different types of support attacks. One calls in your benched characters at the cost of your attacking character's spirit points. The called in character will continually rotate around the benched characters. Meanwhile, you can also call in a specific assist character that you first assign to your attacking character. Attackers without an assisting character will not have this option available. Unlike the bench characters, these assist characters cost no SP but will not rotate around. Another new introduction to the battle system is the evasion gauge. In the first game, it did feel kind of cheap when heavy characters would keep triggering forced evasions on your party. To account for this, the enemy now has a gauge that will fill up with attacks, and only when it is full will the enemy have the ability to trigger a forced evasion. Along with this, your own party can now trigger their own forced evasions as long as they have 50 common frontier gauge. Forced evasion isn't your only defensive option, as you can now switch out injured characters for healthier ones before an attack, allowing them to take hits instead. You can also switch around your party members on your character's turns. This way the game ensures that you are never locked to playing as the characters assigned at the front line for the whole battle. Much like the last game, Takuya Hanoka and Nafumi Tsuruyama returned to compose this game's soundtrack. With the game being a direct sequel to the previous Super Robot Tyson game, we see the return of multiple tracks from the last game, with some new tracks for the new characters and locations. While old tracks litter the game's score, a lot of these tracks have been remixed in an attempt to spice up the soundscape of the game. Personally, I can't say if I prefer the versions in this game over the first, as there are some I like better, while others I find to be not as good. For themes that I really like, I have to go with Suzuka's theme of Dancing Battle All Night, and Axel's theme of Dark Knight, whose promo riff is still stuck in my head. Speaking about Dark Knight, the game once again has a host of cameo music to go alongside the cameo characters. This includes new tracks from Namco Cross Capcom and Xenosaga, although much like last time, I have no idea where the Xenosaga tracks come from because I have never heard them in the games before. Now, one of the biggest additions to this game has to be the inclusion of an anime opening. The opening was done by the studio Xeed, who does a pretty alright job, although this whole scene just leaves my eyes rolling. With the exclusion of that part, the rest of the opening is pretty good, in part due to the high-octane song Unchained World, composed by Noriyasu Agematsu and sung by Nana Mizuki. So does this game live up to its namesake and exceed the first Endless Frontier game? Well, while I do think that this is a better game simply as a result of the enlarged cast and gameplay mechanics, I wouldn't say that I am blown away by the improvements in quality. This game is definitely no Tales of the Abyss or Xenosaga 3 when it comes to dwarfing its predecessor. In fact, there are several parts of this game I find inferior to the previous game. Most notable of these issues has to be a laddie, who's quite the boring main character. With Haken in the last game, you got a protagonist who plays extremely well off the story's stupidity and fan service. Meanwhile, in this game, a lady comes across as kind of boring and not someone I find much interest in following. In fact, with Haken returning in this game, still with his witty personality, his everything feels like he becomes the protagonist again. On a more positive note, I do appreciate this game's improvements, especially in the presentation and gameplay. The game ups the flashiness of attacks as well as introduces new features. Also, I always like it when unplayable characters become playable, and this sequel delivers that in droves. Overall, I rate this game in the same manner as the first game, that being a solid JRPG on the DS, but one I don't really see myself coming back to again. Well, it's taken me over a year to get to this point, but I'm finally done with the early games in this series, and I can now review a game that actually carries the namesake of this retrospective series. So without further ado, join me next time as I look back on 2012's Project Cross Zone for the Nintendo 3DS.